So before we get this video started, I want to make a quick announcement. This Sunday around 7 o'clock Eastern Time, I'm going to be doing a live stream on the channel, which is something I rarely do, so you guys don't want to miss it. I'll be giving my full predictions for the PlayStation 5 versus Xbox Series X console war coming up soon, so that should be cool. And at the end of the stream, I'm going to take your guys' phone calls on Discord, so we'll have a live conversation in front of tens of people, however many people decide to actually show up. I don't know, but I wanted to announce it because a lot of you enjoy my live streams and you never get the notifications for them. So I wanted to make that announcement right now. This Sunday, 7 o'clock Eastern, I'm going live. So we are over a month away from the release of the highly anticipated single-player RPG from CD Projekt Red, Cyberpunk 2077. I know a lot of my fans, a lot of my friends, they're really excited about this game. They can't wait to finally play it when it launches on November 18th. And yeah, there was a little bit of controversy about the crunch and about how the developers were being put under forced overtime in order to get the game released on time to avoid another delay. I will eventually make a separate video about this topic, about working conditions in the video game industry, whether or not unionization is a good idea for developers, and all that fun stuff that kind of goes into politics and political territory, which I'm kind of afraid of because I want to keep gaming and politics as separate as possible. I want to keep politics as far away from this channel as possible because you have these jerk-offs on YouTube who all they do is reread news articles. They don't even have anything to contribute, but all of a sudden on Twitter they think they're political experts and they think they know everything about the world and how the world works. It's just so frustrating. No matter who they support for this bullshit election, nobody cares about your political views. I want to circle back around Cyberpunk 2077 before this goes a little out of hand and we just go on a random tangent. So Cyberpunk, one of the controversies was about crunch, but another thing that grabbed my attention about the development of this game is that they're purposely making the game shorter in order to accommodate people that thought that The Witcher 3 was too long. Now, I personally, honestly, didn't beat The Witcher. I played through, like, the first 2 missions, and it just wasn't my thing. It's probably slow to get into, and I just need to have the time and patience to do it. But, you know, the older you get, the more you realize that you just have less time to just sink a ridiculous amount of hours into a single video game. So I understand why people thought The Witcher was too long, but at the same time, you have all these linear action games that accommodate those people, too. So the question that I'm going to bring up throughout this video, and the main topic, is how long should a video game be? What is the perfect length for a $60, now $70 game? I know Cyberpunk is not going to go up to $70, but we're starting to see that trend now where games are going to launch at $70 instead of $60, which I made a separate video about months ago. I'm not going to regurgitate what I said in those videos because, yeah, no, I'm not paying $70 for games. I don't know about you guys. I'm just not going to do it. I refuse. But that's another thing, like, that is very interesting about how much are people willing to pay for video games. What do they consider the most valuable when they decide to put $60 or $70 into a game? Is it the length of the game? Is it the amount of content that's in the game? Because on the other hand, you have games like Doom Eternal, which was critically acclaimed, but they only have a single-player campaign. Yes, there's a multiplayer. It's called Battle Mode, but all the online modes from Doom 2016 were scrapped and removed, were not put in. Doom 2016 objectively has more replay value than Doom Eternal because Doom has a single-player campaign, meaning Doom 2016, but it also has a robust online multiplayer. And I've gotten into a little trouble saying that I refuse to buy Doom Eternal on the basic fact that it does not have the multiplayer from 2016, and people were mad at me saying, oh, Doom Eternal's an amazing game, how can you say anything bad about it, why aren't you going to buy it? I think we all have different expectations, and most people disagree. They say they have no problem with Doom Eternal having no multiplayer, and that's fine, but I disagree. I think it's a complete waste of money, for me personally, to put down $60 for a single-player campaign that I'll play once or twice and then never touch it again. I will never pay $60 or $70 for that matter for a game that only has a linear single-player campaign. I can think of pretty much every PlayStation exclusive that we've got this generation, with the exception of Horizon and Spider-Man, because those were third-person action games, as were almost all the PlayStation exclusives. No variety whatsoever. they all felt very similar to each other because they're all third-person action games with these stealth elements to them. Like, they all have that same cookie-cutter, basic gameplay, and there's no variety. No FPS games, no racing games, no fighting games, just these third-person linear games. And yeah, Spider-Man and Horizon, they're not linear, but The Last of Us, The Last of Us 2, Uncharted 4 had multiplayer, so that's why I was more open to playing that game, because it added more value. But when you talk about these single-player only games, I will never buy them at full price, because I can get another game for the same price that will just add so much more content to the game. I mean, Fallout 4, I played that game for over 3 years, almost nonstop, which is kind of embarrassing to admit that I don't even know how many hours I put into that game, but it's a very unhealthy amount. It's a very dark time in my life. Fallout 4 got me through the darkest of times. It probably stopped me from tying a noose around my neck, and I'm not even being dramatic here. Like, Fallout 4 probably saved my life. It was the only good thing going on for like 1, 2, 3 years. This was right around the time when I was the console king. My life was just falling apart, but I had that game where I could just sink so many hours into, and I was just in a completely different world, and it was worth every single penny. But when you think of other games that you just play it, you play through the campaign once, and then you never touch it again. I can think of a lot of games back in the day. Bulletstorm, back it was $60, and that game people had mixed opinions of, but on the basis alone that it was a single player only game, it was not worth the money. Because I can get another game like Call of Duty for the same price where you have a single player campaign, a linear single player, and then you have online multiplayer, which in a lot of cases can last you at least a full year leading into the life cycle of the next COD. So the point I'm trying to make is that I think online multiplayer definitely adds a lot of value. There are certain games like Fallout, Elder Scrolls that really don't need it, especially Fallout 76, that online-only game is atrocious. I've heard it got better, but it's still just not my thing. The entire creation engine of Fallout and the gameplay and all of it just fundamentally does not work for an online setting. So I will admit that there are certain games that just do not work for online multiplayer, but I think online multiplayer objectively adds more replay value to a game than just a single-player campaign. Like, okay, so Cyberpunk doesn't need a multiplayer, even though it has one, so Cyberpunk isn't really part of that conversation. But as far as the single-player campaign goes, I don't know. How long does Cyberpunk need to be? I think there are certain games that are long just to be long, that just have, like, a ridiculous amount of hours, but I think as long as the story fits, that's perfectly fine. But at the same time, I think a game should be priced accordingly. I do not think that Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War and a single-player game like The Last of Us 2, I don't think they're worth the same value. I don't think they're both worth $60. And that has nothing to do with the fact that, Last of Us 2 has a terrible story. I personally never played the goddamn thing, so I don't know if it's good or bad. I have no fucking clue. It could be amazing for all I know, but I know it got mixed reviews. Either way, the fact that they removed multiplayer from The Last of Us, that added so much replay value. I played the single-player campaign for The Last of Us 1 back in the day, and then I moved on to the multiplayer because there was nothing else to do. So what I'm trying to say is I don't mind if there's a linear campaign that, there's no choice involved, and it's pretty much like an action movie in a game. I have absolutely no problem with that. I'm just not going to pay $60 for it. I'm certainly not going to pay $70 for it if that's all you have to offer. Even a single-player open world, it would have to be a robust open world that makes me feel like I'm a part of it and I'm a deciding factor in it, like Fallout did, like the Elder Scrolls did. I would even go as far as to say that GTA 5, if it was only single-player, would be worth the money, because Red Dead Redemption 2, I never touched the online and only played the single player and still thought it was definitely worth $60. So online multiplayer isn't always something that inherently adds to the game, especially when it's just tacked on just to say they have a multiplayer. I know a lot of people felt that way about Doom. I actually had a lot of fun with it, so to each their own, I guess. And I do think if a multiplayer game is good enough, it should get a $60 price tag. Like Overwatch, when it came out, I think it was worth $60 because it is one of my favorite multiplayer games of this entire generation, which, the bar is set pretty low because this hasn't been a good generation for online games, but I think Overwatch was a really well-polished game, even at launch. And I think, you know, if you focus entirely on the multiplayer, I think that's perfectly fine to charge $60. So, I mean, I can't tell you what I think is a good value for a video game in terms of, like, how many hours it's worth, because not every hour is equal. There's games like The Division, which offers thousands of hours of content, and Destiny, that offers thousands of hours of content. But most of that is just doing the same shit over and over and over again, doing the same raids and loots and all that bullshit. So not every hour is equal. Let's put that out there also. So we can't just judge how much a video game is worth based off of hours. But as far as how long a video game should be, I think in terms of price, you know, I'm just not going to pay $60 or $70 for a game that just has a 10-hour campaign and nothing else. In almost every circumstance, I'm just never going to do that. If GTA 5 only had a 10-hour campaign instead of the 30 hours or 25 hours that it had, I probably wouldn't have played it. I probably wouldn't have bought it for $60. So when you have these smaller games like that just have the single player and that's all they're focused on, I think they should be priced accordingly. I want to check out Crash 4, but I think $60 for that game is a bit absurd. Even if it's an amazing game, I just don't think it's a good value because they just have that campaign and that's it. Sure, you could replay, sure you could trophy hunt, but the average person doesn't give a fuck about that. They play the game once and that's it. And I just don't think $60 is a good value because 2 years from now, it'll go down in price and I'll have the same exact experience as you did 2 years ago because you had to buy it early. So, those are my thoughts on the length of a video game. How long should a video game be? It's a very complicated answer because, like I said, not all hours are equal to each other. So, if one game says they have hundreds of hours and the other game only has 20, I would take 20 hours of Red Dead Redemption 2 over 2,000 hours of Anthem. But I just generally make a rule to myself to never buy games new on launch day because I don't follow the hype like everyone else does. I couldn't give less of a fuck if I can play Cyberpunk on day one or if I play it 3 or 4 years from now. There's really no rush. Especially now that I'm older. Maybe when I was younger and video games were literally my fucking life, or I just put so much time into it and I didn't give a fuck because I was young, I had zero responsibilities. I guess that's fine, but the older you get, like, even if I bought the game day one, I'm not going to have the time to finish it anytime soon, so why am I in a rush to buy it? I have to buy it when it comes out. It's just, I don't understand why people are so obsessed with the hype. They buy into the hype so much. Yeah, the game will probably be good, I'm sure, but I'm in no rush to play it. And that way, I'll get the game a lot cheaper than the people who bought it day one. I'll have the exact same experience as they did. So, it's a win-win for me. I'm sure I'll eventually get to Cyberpunk, but I don't need to play it now. I don't need to play in November. So coming from someone that never buys any game new despite how good it looks or how amazing it might be, I just wait for pretty much everything. Maybe I'm not the best person to give an opinion on this because a lot of people just buy every game new, but I think I'd be more likely to buy a new game if it had more replayability, because if it's just one linear single-player campaign, which is not what Cyberpunk is, but for other games like The Last of Us 2, after I beat the game once, it's pretty fucking useless. I can wipe my ass with the game at that point. There is nothing left if there's no multiplayer, if there's nothing else. Because, like I said, I don't care about trophy hunting. I don't care about any of that shit. Once I beat the campaign once, maybe I'll come back to it in like a year or 2 years or 3 years. But I'm not going to keep replaying the same single player over and over and over again, because it gets boring. It's like rewatching the same show on loop. It just doesn't make any sense. The only exception would be Fallout, Elder Scrolls, or even the Telltale games that are single-player only, where you can replay the game and have a completely different experience or a completely different outcome. Those are like the only exceptions to the rule, but generally, especially when we're talking about short, linear campaigns, I will completely avoid them at $60 in pretty much every circumstance. I will never buy those games at full price, ever, because they're just too short. And yes, I think games like Call of Duty are much more valuable than Doom Eternal, which only has a single-player campaign. Even the single-player campaign is kick-ass and the gameplay is solid. There's just so much more for me to do with Call of Duty. I have the single-player, I have the online multiplayer, I have the zombies. I have so much more to do with that game that I'll just buy Call of Duty instead. I know that makes me sound like a casual and people aren't going to like that. Oh, how could you say Call of Duty is better than Doom? Well, I'm not necessarily talking about quality. I'm talking about value. And those two things aren't necessarily the same. So keep that in mind. But I just refuse to pay the same price for Doom Eternal as Doom 2016 when Doom Eternal is literally half the game that 2016 was. It's just not going to happen. The most I would pay for Doom Eternal is $30 because it's half the game that 2016 was. Same with The Last of Us 2. I just refuse to pay $60 for it. Never mind the bullshit reviews. I don't care about the reviews because I'm my own person. I can make up my own mind. But the most I'm going to spend on that game will always be $30 because The Last of Us Part 1 had an online multiplayer which I put most of my time into, and I got most of the value from the factions multiplayer. So if you take away half of the game in the sequel, I'm only going to spend $30. And in the case of The Last of Us 2, they're selling me half of what they sold with The Last of Us 1, so the most I'd pay for that is $30. So that's how I pretty much determine how much I'm willing to spend on a game, especially if it's a sequel compared to the predecessor. I think Cyberpunk being shorter than The Witcher isn't a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination, but it's definitely interesting that they're making the game shorter in order to appeal to people who think The Witcher is too long. Like, I don't think they should even care about what people say. As long as it's good for the story. Don't have a bunch of filler shit, but if the story requires to be told in a 35, 40-hour time, they shouldn't just take away 5 hours in order to accommodate people that have shorter attention spans or have less free time. Then just don't buy the game. Buy those shitty linear games instead. You know what I mean? But I want to know what you guys think. This is a really long video, longer than usual. I apologize. Want to know what you guys have to say, though, because it is a fairly interesting topic. So, yeah, that pretty much wraps up today's video. Hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for watching. I appreciate the continued support, and I hope to see you all on Sunday. Take care.